So our next video to be released on Cygnus Alpha Down and Safe is a reuniting of two people from season 4. Please welcome Brian Lighthill and writer Colin Davis, who both worked on the story Gold. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving up your time to have this chat. So is this the first time you've seen each other since 1981, or have you seen each other since? Or
it was the Blake 7 party, I think, is the last time I saw Brian.
The end of term party.
Yes, yes.
When we were all presented with tiny little miniature oraks.
That's right. Yeah.
Do you still have them?
And a sort of sense of gloom because everybody knew it was almost certainly all over.
So, yeah. Brian, you still have your tiny Aurak?
I do have my tiny Aurak. I'd be hard pushed to find it, but I know I still have it.
Oh, coming on eBay soon, I would imagine.
An eBay near you.
Indeed, indeed. So, I suppose we need to talk about the day and age we find ourselves in lockdown. How have you been keeping yourselves safe in this time, and how have you been managing?
Well, the novelty's wearing off now, I have to be honest. The gardens never looked so lovely. I don't think I've ever done any more gardening in my life. It's obviously the accumulation, for me. It's okay. It's what gets me are the nightly death tolls. That really hurts. So the answer to your question is I'm still here.
Yeah.
And I'd love it for everybody to be over soon.
Yes. Yes.
And me too. I'd go along with that. We got a place in France, and that is nightmare for the lockdown because we haven't been able to go there. So we have got acres of grass that will be up to your eyebrows, and it's taken me about 10 years to cut it and make it look nice. And actually, so it's all gone.
I remember, Colin, when I first got in contact with you a couple of years ago for one of our Cygnus Alpha events, you said that you were back and forth doing the garden in France. So
yeah. Well, I used to go to France all the summers, from spring till the late autumn. And obviously over the winter you could leave it. It didn't matter. Mm-hmm. Now it's lost. It'll be sort of getting farmers with tractors to get it back to any order again.
An interesting sign of the British priorities, the thing that opened up first was the golf courses, the garden centres, and bringing back possibly sport. Oh, tennis was okay.
I've heard mentioned people saying, "Oh, it's a bit like the Blitz," and I'm like, "This is nothing like the Blitz. This is."
You could see the enemy there.
Yeah, absolutely. You could see the enemy, and also, do you know what? Yes, there is that threat, but we've been 2-3 months. 2.5 months into this lockdown. How many years did the war last, and how many?
Well, as an actor on BBC Radio 4 put it the other day, when the people use that comparison, the theatres never closed down during the war.
That's true. Yeah. That is true. In fact,
the windmill didn't.
No, the
windmill didn't.
No, the opening night of what was it? Blythe Spirit took place in a air raid.
There you go.
Yeah.
And the show must go on, so it did.
Indeed. And on that note, let's crack on with our show. How did you both get involved with Blake 7?
Well, in my case, it was my first baby. Mm-hmm. I'd been given the privilege of doing the BBC in-house director's training course.
Yep.
And then you do a last piece mini drama, and you tout that around to various producers. I started to tout my tape round, and a certain Veer Lorimer wrote to me And he said, yes, I will give you 2 Blake 7s. So that's how I got involved. And so that was, I mean, this interview is taking me back to my very first job as a director.
Wow.
How amazing is that?
How about you, Colin?
It was the first thing I'd written as a proper drama for TV. I'd written a fair bit for radio, and I was at Broadcasting House talking to a lady called Pat Truman, who said, do you know they're looking for writers for Blake 7? But it was like everything with the BBC, it was really, really vague. So she said, well, you could give it a go. So it was a tormented thing of having to ring up the BBC. Who is doing Blake 7? Oh, it's Vera Lorimer. You probably need to talk to Chris Boucher, all of which were names which were just I'd seen on screen and didn't know anything about. So for me, it was just cold calling, ringing up Chris and saying, is there any chance you could consider me as a writer? And he said, well, come along to a meeting, because he was a very approachable guy. And there were about 4 writers he'd invited along. And he showed us, he asked us how much we knew about Blake 7. Now, Blake 7 to me was the series I would really have loved to have been in on right from the start. I can remember very often doing the washing up and hearing the title music come on and thinking, this is the show I want to be part of, and the kids would be glued to it. So this was great, but of course, it did used to go out at a time when I'd always be doing the washing up. So I limited, like all the other writers there, limited knowledge of Blake 7. So Chris sort of expected this and played us videos of some of the ones that had been written, that he'd written anyway. I can remember when he showed us, which I never actually saw on television, but it was one where they were fighting an android. And I can remember the line that Avon said as they were hesitating, because it was so human. They were hesitating whether to kill it as it approached them, and it was deadly. And I can remember Avon's line, "It's a machine, damn it!" And then they shot it, and they were all right.
And you know what? Everybody who's watching this video right now will know exactly what episode that is.
Yeah, that's great. Anyway, I thought that was thrilling. I was dead right. And then Chris said, well, look, we're doing a 4th series. It's going to have to be different. We're going to a new spaceship, and it's going to be a rickety old crate that they just turn up on and find by accident. So the series is going to be about getting things, because they need things on. They haven't got this super whatever it was they had before. They've got this crate, yeah. So he said, we need things about them getting things. And if you look back through the 4th series, you can see how every writer virtually probably started with the same clue from Chris: get something, and then twisted it around like writers will to get what they want. And so I thought, well, this is important to me, because it's the first time I've written something that will go on really big time telly. And I put aside a week in which I would just sit in the bedroom, lie back and try and think of things. And the more you do that, as anybody who's written say, the harder it gets to think of anything. You get really totally frozen and stuck. And it got to about Wednesday night when I was suddenly scribbling money. And then a story just shot out. So within about a day, I thought up about 4 stories. One of which I thought, 2 of which I thought were good. I thought this one was good, and another one which totally gave background to a different background to Blake's. And Chris Boucher wrote back about both those stories. He said, yeah, I like those, but the second one about the background to Blake is just not on because you haven't read the Bible and it will contradict everything. So he said, but I'd like to chat to you about the gold heist thing. And we took it from there. I wrote the story out. He invited us up to this pub where he used to sit around in Shepherd's Bush, just up from where the offices they had at the time were. We sat in the pub and we talked about it. And like everything with the BBC, with producers generally, you're sitting there thinking, well, are they going to commit themselves or are they not? And so after about the fourth pint, I said to Chris, well, I did think you liked the idea of the gold story. And he said, yes, I do. We're going to go with it. So then it was a case of going back. That's the start. Let me not hog the story. That's where it all came about.
I love the idea that we were both babes in arms. We were both newbies, weren't we?
Absolutely, yeah.
I was a new director, and you were a new writer, certainly to TV.
Yeah. And as the writer, I found, I mean, there's a story in the middle whereby I then tried to write this thing, and I'd never set out anything other than a radio script before. And I don't know whether you remember, because things are so much more relaxed these days. People can write things on the back of an envelope and other people will read it sympathetically. But I remember the sort of stuff was around in the air at the time. Really sniffy, nose in the air stuff about what was required of a television or film scriptwriter. And I can remember reading one of the endless guide things that came out of Hollywood and things like that. The minute you don't set it out properly, we know you're no good at all, basically, which is absolute crap. But this thing of people with limited self-confidence trying to pin down whether you obey certain formal rules will decide whether you're any good or not. But there was a sense and a purpose about laying out film scripts and television scripts properly, because it does force you, especially as a writer, when you're prone to just see things as conversations and then this happens, then that happens, then something else happens. It does force you to see it almost shot by shot. And it pins your mind down. And I didn't know this, so I wrote something really quite indisciplined. And back came this thing from Chris Boucher with on every page, big red lines to it. Next page, absolute crap. All over the place.
This must have given you a lot of confidence.
It did, but he'd learned a lot about person management, because he said, I rang him up. I said, looks like I'm not going to be doing this then. He said, no. You just didn't manage to set it out in a way that I could read it or that would be precise for a director to direct. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll send you 2 scripts and then you can see exactly what we're doing. And he sent his own first script for the first one of the series. And he sent another one. I don't know whether I should say this even after all this time, because
an exclusive coming up here.
I don't know what rights he had to send somebody else's script through the post, but he sent the one with Dr. Plaxton in it. I'll just say that. And that was, I think, episode 4 in the first series. And these had already been written and they were beautifully laid out and they were all clear to read. And it was slightly different in those days. You can't write things like a film script like you would nowadays, because they had the film bits that they had 10 minutes or 11 minutes down one side of the page, and the television bits down the other side of the page. And so you had to get used to that. And then I thought, but suddenly, yeah, he's right. He's told me how to do this. And I took about another 2 months just thinking about it. And then I wrote this thing precisely, which was exactly as it actually went to Brian when he took over. Except that on the start, I'd written a scene with a figure that was Servalan, but you could never tell, moving pieces around a chessboard, so that this whole thing that underlines the gold story was seen as a game of chess in which she'd worked out every move that covered whatever the other side did, and so on and so on and so on. And it was Servalan playing this game of chess with these people. And then it would start. And then the only thing Chris said at the end is he rang me back. He said, "This is great. We'll go on this." He said, "We'll just cut the we'll cut the chess scene."
You know, I never knew about the chess scene, and I'm disappointed. I wonder if I can do a reshoot. Because it's a really nice idea, because it's very Servalan too, isn't it? That she's out trying to outfox yet again Ava.
Yeah. Outfox somebody who's trying to outfox her.
Fox her, yes.
Which
anyway, that's
the game of chess. Anyway, that is the game of chess.
That is the game of chess. Yeah. No, I really like that. It's a great shame that scene was out, wasn't it?
But then it would have taken something else to be cut, I suppose, for the timing.
Probably. Did you ever imagine that I would get Roy Kinnear to play?
No, not at all. I had seen him. I told Jackie, she used to be called Jackie Ophir, that ran the Blake 7 Club. They asked me to go and have cream tea in somewhere near Honiton.
I'm actually sure that Jackie will be watching this right now.
Yeah, but it wasn't hot. It was a place called Ufcombe. I was just trying to be loose. But we went there for cream tea, and I told her this story that when I saw this guy, Keeler, I saw him as some hard South African bush veld man from who spoke and said Devon and things like that, which is the only word I could say in a South African accent to myself. And so I kept imagining every speech in the thing was really originally heard by me in this Devon accent. And so I saw him as really quite a hard case. And then Brian rang me up and said, "Well, I'm going to be the director. What do you think about Roy Kinnear?" And I thought, wow. And it was inspired. I thought it was just great, because he was such a fantastic actor. And he would bring to it something that would take it into a totally different dimension.
There was a film that he made about a year, I think, before I got involved with Blake 7, called The Hill. And it was a prisoner of war. No, it was a prison camp for soldiers, British soldiers, and they punished these soldiers. And he was playing the overweight, not fit.
Yeah, I saw that film.
Forced up sandhills and things. It was a very powerful piece of work.
Yeah, Sean Connery was in it.
That's right. And I thought, this guy can act. He's not just a funny man. He can really, really, really grab a part. And that was the kind of duality that I was after with the bursar, with the chief robber, because I wanted him to be a slime ball, basically. The trouble with, sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say that for me, Roy Kinnear appeared in one of my all-time favourite movies, the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory
Yes.
as Mr. Salt, and he is fantastic in that. He really is, and he is a fantastic actor. And I'm hoping in a few minutes, Brian, you'll say how you got him to get approached for the part and what happened, because his son is now obviously a very, very good actor.
Well, yeah, sort of. He's doing all right. Yeah.
So back over to you.
Well, I first of all rang the agent up. I did all the protocols, or my PA rang the agent up, and that was fine. It turned out that obviously he wanted to see the script, and it turned out that he lived very, very close to me. I lived at that time in Barnes in London, and he lived near Richmond Park. So I thought, well, I'll take it up there because I might be able to blag a few sentences with him. So I took him up there, and everything was fine. I drove up, got out of the car, and in the distance, it was quite a nice sized garden. And in the distance was the gardener, and he was doing some tending, and there was a little young kid, probably about 7 or 8, maybe that's all, playing. And he came up to me, this 7-year-old, and said, "What do you want?" And I said, "I'm looking for Roy Kinnear." And he said, "Oh, right." And he turned round to the gardener, as I thought it was. He said, "Dad, you're in work again." And that's how I met Roy Kinnear. But it was on the basis of The Hill that I really cast him. That was the clincher. And he was absolutely fantastic to work with. The only problem is he was just such a funny man that rehearsals sometimes would disintegrate into laughter rather than me, bearing in mind that this was my first job. So I was quite nervy about the whole thing. But I can remember the rehearsal room being doubled over and everybody in it being doubled over as well with laughter at something he'd said or done or just a look. There was an element of Morecambe and Wise about him. You know, he didn't actually have to say anything. He just had to be there and you started laughing. It was a joy. It was an absolute joy. But he was a consummate professional.
And I'm not sure if you both are aware of this, but the costume that he wore in that particular episode still exists to this day and is owned by a gentleman by the name of Gary, who I'm sure Gary will be watching this. And Gary occasionally does don that particular costume at events.
I saw the costume when you did the gig in London, the big conference in London. Yeah. And a whole display room there of costumes and memorabilia and bits and pieces, props and things. And yeah, the costume was there. And it was like a huge wave wafted over me of nostalgia. And actually, it's a wonder it's still standing because it wasn't the most substantial costume.
No, I mean, it's almost 40 years old, isn't it? So
yeah, well, this is true. Yes. So, go on.
No, carry on, please.
No, I was just going to say, just ask the owner to put it on if he does insist on putting it on very carefully now, because it's had 40 years of life.
Oh, believe me,
which is probably about 39 and a half more than the.
Yeah, no, Gary is fantastic with all his costumes, and a big shout out to Gary for all he has done to keep all these costumes together, and he's always on the lookout for costumes. So anybody watching this who may have a costume at the back of their attic or something, please contact Gary because he will buy it off you. So I want to ask you, Colin. You only wrote the one episode. Obviously, you know, the series was coming to an end, but were you aware that the series was coming to an end and it would only be a one-off for you?
Not when I wrote it, no. In fact, like every writer, I rather hoped that this could go on and on and on. And it was the party we were talking about earlier when the buzz was going around, this series is coming to an end. And Chris has been pressured by the BBC to make sure that the very last episode is really hard to get out of. And I kept thinking, well, now, if if I had to find a way around that, could I get out of that? But it would it would be very hard to get out of the bind he put them in for the end. So there'd obviously been very, very real pressure. And to this day, I don't know, you're on the inside to the Blake Seven story, but why did somebody in the BBC hate something so popular that much that they wanted to stop it there and then? I don't know.
I think,
but it's probably the same people who wanted to get rid of Doctor Who and things like that. You know, it's that kind of hierarchy who are not actually in touch with just what the populace want.
Yeah, yeah.
Because there's no rhyme or reason why you could have gone on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, I sort of since learned that they did have plans and hopes for a fifth series.
On the subject of a fifth series, I know Paul Darrow, when he was with us, he actually wrote a couple of books and had a few ideas, and the Big Finish audio range sort of picked up on that a little bit for their 40th anniversary story. We had a much older Avon reminiscing and telling stories.
I saw at a distance years after that Paul Darrow had been thinking of taking it further.
Yeah.
But nothing presumably came of that. I don't know.
Well,
I think it was a pity. Sorry,
I was
Brian.
involved. I was involved with Paul. There was a possibility of a feature film being done, and we went quite a long way down the line with trying to set that up. And then I believe Sky picked up the rights from the Terry Nation estate, and they pushed it forward as well as a possible series again. But obviously by that time Paul was much older, and it was going to be more of a flashback time with Paul as a kind of storytelling narrator. None of this happened in the end. But you know, when I was saying that it was surprising that they brought it to a sudden close, years later, I found myself with a long contract working at the BBC in Pebble Mill doing radio. So I went from television to radio at the end of my career as a director. And I decided to do 2 Blake Seven radios with a majority of the cast with the original cast. And the publicity I got for that was, and the interest was so large. I had more publicity for that than probably for the rest of my career. So the interest was there and the memory is there.
Yeah. I just wonder whether for television, whether bringing it back would have been a great idea, because isn't it possible that it's like a relationship? You have a relationship with somebody, it could go on forever, but something stops it. And 2 or 3, 4 or 5 years later, you feel, could we pick that up again? And everybody's moved on in different directions. I just wonder whether actually the attempts to bring it back were because that particular relationship, which was still hot in 1981, was probably colder in the late 80s and the 90s.
Well,
possibly.
Possibly. And also, I think the show has had a real loyal fan base from day one.
Yeah.
And I think that's kept the Blake Seven legacy alive. And also, about more than 5 years ago, Big Finish Audio Productions got the license to do brand new Blake Seven full cast audio plays set within the first 3 series. Sadly, they can't use season 4, which you guys both worked on due to various rights and copyright issues. But I suppose, really, I want to ask you, Brian, if you were given the option then to direct for Big Finish a audio version of Blake 7, would you do it? And Colin, would you write it?
Would I do it? I have to be honest. I think that my directing days are probably over. A lot of water has gone under the bridge since I retired from directing.
Yeah.
Not just years, but lots of experiences, and my life's taken a different turn completely.
Yeah.
So I don't think that, to be honest, to serve the program, I would be doing it much of a favor. Colin, I think probably you probably could write it easier than I could direct it.
I'd love to write it, but then I'd sort of live a whole life as somebody who just finds incredible merit in things that you've never thought of 5 minutes before when somebody else has suggested it. That's the way writers do. You know, somebody says to you, here's an idea, would you be prepared to be the writer? And a writer says, oh yes, the greatest idea ever. No, Blake 7 was I think very, very special. I think it had a lot of mileage in it while it was hot. Afterwards, the extended fan club interest I can understand, but to start again, it would have needed to hit the vibe for a whole new generation all over again. But if somebody said, would you write it? Would you be part of a writing team? By God, yes. It would be the great privilege, you know.
So I want to just move away from Blake 7 for a few moments, talk about other aspects of your both of your careers. So when this video goes out, Colin, it's going to go out on Bank Holiday Monday, the end of May. Yeah. And traditionally on a Bank Holiday Monday, whilst growing up as a kid, especially in the summer, it would be Cliff Richard's summer holiday on there. But you have a connection to Cliff Richard because you wrote some stuff for him. Is that right?
No, not really. No. I used... really, we're going back now to the 70s. I used to run a comedy review company. And we performed all around tatty venues in London. And while there, we wrote lots of things. And one of the key people in it was a chap that went on to become a really well-known children's entertainer, a chap called Chris Lillicrap. And Chris and I used to sit down writing gags, basically, and sending them around to see if anybody would possibly buy them. And Cliff Richard bought some for the ghastly slot he used to have in his Saturday night show, where people would come up to him and say doctor jokes to him.
Yeah.
And I won't even quote ours. we thought they were Doctor, I got distemper. No, that's impossible. Only God's dogs get distemper. I tell you, I got distemper, this terrible temper. Embarrassment, sorry.
No. Fantastic. Thank you. Where do we go from there? Brian, after obviously you directed a second episode of Blake 7, Orbit. We don't have a lot of time to speak about that. I'm sorry, everybody who's watching this, but I just want to ask you about your memories of the 1984 series, The Invisible Man.
Right. Well, about an hour before this meeting with you, I was actually talking to the Invisible Man, Pip Donaghy.
Why? Really?
Well, we're great mates and have stayed great mates ever since that show. Yeah, Pip's well and getting older, like we all are. And we were actually talking about that because I mentioned that I was going to be doing this Zoom with you. And he said, oh, gosh, I'd love to do a Zoom about the Invisible Man. Because it was an extraordinary show to do. Again, I was very new as a director. And the challenges, which were some of them were very similar to the Blake 7 challenges. I'm talking technically now. Yeah. The overlays and the being invisible and having props floating around you, all that kind of stuff, all technical stuff, which I was learning on the job. But we were groundbreaking with the Invisible Man. We had a rig when he was walking around with completely invisible, but had a dressing gown on. And we had a rig with a small person in it. And it was all the arms and shoulders and flexing of muscles, ribs and things were hydraulically done by the guys who created the very first rig for Superman flying.
Oh, right.
So we had those guys from Pinewood doing this for us in the studio. But at other times, of course, he is visible, and we had to dye Pip's hair because he was a blonde albino, and albinos have blue eyes. Pip has brown eyes, so we had to put full contact lenses in. What Pip went through to do this show is unbelievable. He was a martyr to his art. But it was great fun, absolutely great fun. And some of the sequences we used to rehearse with Pip and David Gwilym, who played his arch nemesis in the story. And we used to do fight sequences with them, with the two of them together in the rehearsal rooms, go out on location. And of course, Pip would just stand by delivering lines and grunts and oohs and ahs. And David had to act rolling over this invisible body, which was I mean, the guys, I was blessed with a cast that were game for doing this, but we also had some groundbreaking effects, which now, of course, are nothing, but they were groundbreaking at the time.
At the time.
Now,
coming back to Blake 7, and you were just mentioning about Invisible Man and location work. Obviously, with Gold, there was some location work. Colin, did you go to any of the location or studio recordings?
No. The next time I saw it after the script left me was the final read-through in the rehearsal rooms. Well, not read-through, walk-through in the rehearsal rooms before Brian shot it the next week. So no, I didn't go to the locations, but they were fine.
Ian, it was the inevitable quarry.
Yeah.
We always ended up in a quarry, you know.
Yes.
And we'd have out of shot huge smoke guns or barrels filled with smoke-filled things that were wafted in front of the camera, you know, to create an atmosphere. And it was hysterically funny. I mean, because it was, you know, we were trying to recreate or create Martian moons or moons of some kind to be on, and it was just, you know, there's that end sequence where, of course, Servalan makes that wonderful appearance.
Yes.
My God, she's a cracker. She was a cracker. She really was. She was fabulous to work with. But the costume had given her high heels. This did not make her life any easier. But Jackie insisted on wearing them.
It's a great shot, though.
Yeah, but it's part of her persona. Those heels. It's a rather S&M image, isn't it? Really.
Yeah.
But it was wonderful. She was such fun to work with. But so yeah, the quarries were great. My favourite quarry story is actually a Veer Lorimer story. Am I allowed to tell it?
Please do. Yes.
Okay. Well, the story goes like this. Colin was alluding to where our offices were, which were right on Shepherd's Bush. So it was a small office building. And one day, a director was walking down the corridor past Veer's office. and heard from the other side of the door Veer going, in absolute panic. The director rushed in thinking that Veer was having a heart attack. And there was Veer writhing on the floor, absolutely writhing on the floor. The director leapt down, said, "What? Are you all right, Veer? What's wrong?" They said, "Oh, I'm just blocking out the fight sequence." So there he was rehearsing the fight sequence with himself and making all this noise. It's such a typical Veer story, that though. It's wonderful. I have a legion of Veer stories because he was a genuine eccentric with a heart of absolute gold.
Nicely done there with the pun.
Yes, not bad. Not intentional, but not bad. Yes. There was a time when Veer was interviewing an actress and he'd leant very close and got very intense talking to her. And the actress left at the end of the interview. And Veer was still hunched forward. And he said to the PA who was sitting in the room, he said, "I think I put my back out." And the PA came round immediately to see what was happening. he trapped his tie in the drawer. He couldn't straighten up.
My sort of favourite sequence of all of the episode of Gold is right at the end, where the crew realise the money is worthless. Servalan's got away with it, and then you have this wonderful ending shot on Paul giving this most amazing Paul Darrow laugh of sort of it's a cross between of sinister, crazy, and generally bemused. So mixed emotions, and Paul was really good at doing that. And was that in the script, or was it just?
Oh, it was just written as a laugh, I think, wasn't it? The particular twist that Paul Darrow gave to it was just idiosyncratic and his own. And it just seemed dead right. It's just an example of the wonderful things that happens when an actor just takes a minor clue and turns it into something that people remember the episode by. Thank God.
And what's interesting is it's very much the way that Paul inhabited the character. There was always that edge of this is a game. Now, I'm not talking about the actor, I'm talking about the character. This is a game. And that's why I was a bit sad that chess sequence that you wrote at the beginning of the episode wasn't in it. Because that actually sums up a lot of what Blake 7, certainly by series 4, was about. It's a game, and we've got to outwit the enemy, whoever they are.
Yeah.
Indeed, and let's just hope that our scientists can outwit the enemy that we're all facing at this time.
Indeed. Staying well is the is for me the main thing. Just stay well.
So we're coming towards the end now. So I would like you both to nominate a charity for people to make a small donation to as a way of saying thank you for this video. So Colin, would you like to nominate a charity?
Yeah, probably an unexpected one, but a charity that always has struck me as hugely important is a charity which everybody could easily look up on Google. It's called SPANA, SPANA, and it is for the protection of working animals, donkeys, things like that, throughout the world that are massively maltreated. And it's, to me, a charity that is really worthwhile.
Bearing in mind the times we live in, I think there are a lot of people who are pretty depressed and pretty down at the moment. So the charity I'd like to nominate is the Samaritans. Okay. Because I think they just call them. Just call them. They're very sympathetic. They're very empathetic. And they can do with all the help they can get right this minute, because they probably will be snowed under.
Well, thank you so much for giving up your time. I think we could have spoken so much more, but thank you very much.